Nazi Germany's navy, the Kriegsmarine, was the equivalent of the neglected and also really unsuccessful middle child of the Wehrmacht. But what got them to such a notorious point of unsuccess? Well, here's a little bit of World War II history. You all know about the Treaty of Versailles. It was a treaty signed by Germany and the Allies on June 28th of 1919, formally marking the end of World War I. Basically, Germany had to pay off a sum of war reparations that were pretty ridiculous. They actually never got around to paying it off until 2010. But I mean, hey, at least it's paid off now. I mean, it took them the better part of a century, but who cares? On top of this, Germany had to disarm its troops, lower its military to 100,000 men, lose significant naval, land, and air power, and accept total and utter blame for the Great War. How did these naval restrictions work? Well, for one, the Weimar German Navy, which was now renamed the Reichsmarine, was limited to a displacement limit of 10,000 tons. Their allowed vessels consisted of 6 old pre-dreadnought battleships, 6 light cruisers, 12 destroyers, and 12 torpedo boats. For 2, the use and building of submarines was completely prohibited by the Treaty of Versailles. Absolutely 0 submarines were allowed. Anyway, during Germany's interwar period, the Reichsmarine was established, which was now an exclusively defensive naval force, as the terms of the treaty pretty much outlined just that. Of course, the Weimar Navy took this as initiative to go against the treaty terms and build up their military regardless, as part of German rearmament. The first major illegal, if you will, naval rearmament move pulled by the Weimar government was in 1929, when 3 Deutschland-class Panzerschiffe, the Deutschland, Admiral Graf Spee, and Admiral Scheer, were put into construction. These Panzerschiffe, known to the British as pocket battleships, were, despite being in accordance with the Treaty of Versailles limitations on paper, were way over the treaty-imposed displacement limit of 10,000 tons. Throughout Germany's interwar period, many ships were laid down for construction. Most iconically, the battleships Bismarck and Tirpitz. During this time, only 7 U-boats were constructed. Now, I'm sure you're thinking, I want to commission my own battleships. And as luck would have it, this video is sponsored by World of Warships. Thank you so much to World of Warships for sponsoring this video. World of Warships lets you take command of a vast fleet of warships from history's most iconic naval forces. Whether it's destroyers, cruisers, battleships, or aircraft carriers, the game has something for all sorts of aficionados, for all sorts of eras, and all sorts of ships. The game also offers a vast multitude of countries to choose warships from, meaning you can build your own Kriegsmarine, which is pretty awesome. These ships are also vastly customizable. As you can tell here, I have put a British flag skin onto my Bismarck. But it's not just about the ships. World of Warships offers an incredibly detailed and realistic naval warfare experience. The maps are massive and the battles are extremely immersive. You have to really teach yourself how to play this game, as the challenges are what makes it fun. The game is constantly being updated with new ships, modes, and updates, so you'll never run out of ways to challenge yourself and improve your naval commanding skills. Use the invite code BRAVO for 7 days premium account time, 1.5 million credits, 500 doubloons, and your free choice of the USS Phoenix, Japanese cruiser Kuma, French battleship Corvette, Italian battleship Dante Alighieri, or the HMS Wakeful after you complete 15 battles. World of Warships is available on both PC and console. So what are you waiting for? Get out there and become the naval commander of your dreams on World of Warships. Now, anyways, it wasn't until the Nazi Party came to power in 1933 that these plans of naval rearmament came into open fruition and on a much larger scale. In 1935, the Reichsmarine was officially renamed the Kriegsmarine. This was part of the establishment of the Wehrmacht. Also in 1935, Germany and Great Britain got together and signed the Anglo-German Arms Agreement. The Anglo-German Arms Agreement limited the Kriegsmarine to not specific numbers, but to 35% of the size of the British Royal Navy. Anyways, back to the late 1930s. The Germans needed a new way to effectively fortify and rearm their new Kriegsmarine. Plans were being thrown left and right, some of which focused on the emphasis of building a strong U-boat fleet, others on the construction of a smaller fleet built for coastal protection, and others focused on the construction of a vast surface fleet with a smaller emphasis on U-boat production. The Anglo-German arms agreement also allowed the Kriegsmarine to expand their submarine fleet up to 45% of the size of the Royal Navies. While the rest of the German Admiralty was yapping back and forth about Grand War surface fleet expansion plans, head of Germany's U-boat fleet Karl Dönitz was conjuring plans to expand Germany's U-boat fleet, as he believed this was key to dominating the Atlantic and butt-boinking the Brits. Dönitz claimed that he needed the speedy construction of 300 U-boats in order to cut off trade routes and starve Britain. Well, Dönitz ended up being right, as the German Kriegsmarine, specifically the U-boat fleet, was definitely butt-boinking the Brits in the Atlantic for quite some time. This frightened Winston Churchill. As per his own words, "The only thing that ever really frightened me during the war was the U-boat peril." Anyways, the final plan the German Naval High Command settled on was Plan Z, which was conjured by Grand Admiral Erich Raeder, as pictured here, as Plankton. Officially approved by Hitler in January of 1939, Plan Z called for the construction of a strong battle fleet that could successfully compete with the British Royal Navy by 1945, although construction was only expected to be finished in 1948. It called for the gradual construction of 10 battleships, 4 aircraft carriers, 3 battle cruisers, 8 heavy cruisers, 44 light cruisers, 68 destroyers, and 249 U-boats alongside other numerous vessels. This Plan Z was naturally a complete and utter flop, and it was promptly cancelled when war broke out in 1939. Also, this was enacted, and resources were prioritized for the Heer and the Luftwaffe. That's why I said the Kriegsmarine was like the least favorite child of the Wehrmacht. After the fall of France and the occupation of Norway, the Germans had acquired fresh U-boat bases that led them further out into the Atlantic. This made the Kriegsmarine very happy. Happy enough to dub the 1940 to spring of 1941 period the first happy time. Why was it so happy, you might be asking? Because Kriegsmarine U-boats were seeing overwhelming victories against Allied convoys in the Atlantic. Morale amongst German seamen was very high, while British ships were still lacking in the sonar and radio decryption departments, as they relied on ASDIC sonar, which could not detect surfaced submarines. On top of all this, the Allies were also not too good at providing escorts to convoys. This allowed U-boats to sneak up on isolated merchant convoys in what the British dubbed Wolfpacks. In 1940, Karl Dönitz introduced the Hudeltaktik, or Wolfpack, strategy. It involved a group of U-boats patrolling in a line spaced about 10 miles apart on the surface and at nighttime. When one U-boat spotted an enemy vessel, it would signal the others and coordinate movements via radio. The U-boats would then work together to intercept the target. This was one of the most effective naval warfare strategies developed by the Kriegsmarine in the Second World War. In the early years of the war, everything was just dandy for the Kriegsmarine from the looks of it, especially considering the serious insufficiency of resources they were having to work with. So where did it all go so wrong? Well, after the 1940 invasion of Norway, the Kriegsmarine was down 2 light cruisers and 10 destroyers, alongside many other harmed ships. This was the very first considerable blow to the Kriegsmarine, and afterwards the building of U-boats was prioritized, as it not only saved money, but was also proving more effective at sea. Also, an U-boat campaign sprung up in the Mediterranean starting from 1941 to aid the Italian Navy in operations against the Allies in Malta and Gibraltar. Kriegsmarine surface vessels were mostly left at port by this point, but the Allies were advancing, and they were advancing quick. There were a few Allied advancements that the Germans had to suffer with, starting from 1941. First, a German naval enigma code was cracked by my goat Alan Turing. Now, the Germans didn't know this, but the cracking of this code allowed for British to decrypt some of their U-boat locations, and therefore maneuver convoy routes around U-boat locations. Naturally, a lack of convoys meant a lack of tonnage sunk, meaning the Kriegsmarine did not benefit well from Mr. Turing. Also, the US Navy was now providing escorts to British merchant convoys. US vessels were now also actively getting into active combat with German U-boats. This meant the end of the first happy time for the Germans. There were no more easy convoy kills for them in the North Atlantic. While there were plenty of losses before the sinking of the iconic Bismarck, it was one of the most painful for Germany. The famous battleship Bismarck, alongside the Prinz Eugen heavy cruiser, were set out to sea in May of 1941, with the goal of breaking out into the Atlantic and attacking British merchant convoys. As you may know, this plan did not go as smoothly as expected. The Brits quickly learned of Bismarck's journey thanks to the Swedes tattling on the Germans, and they sent out a vast majority of the British home fleet in response. This included their prized battlecruiser HMS Hood, which, while having a brutal face-off May 24th with the Bismarck, was exploded and sunk by the Kriegsmarine, killing all but 3 of the crew of 1,418 on board. The Bismarck got away unscathed, but was spotted by the Royal Navy May 26th. The Bismarck was then bombed repetitively by British aircraft. The day after that, 3 Royal Navy vessels opened fire on the Bismarck, which heavily damaged her armor. Ultimately, the Bismarck had to be scuttled. The sinking of the Bismarck killed 2,000 men, including Admiral Lutyens. This was essentially the breaking point for the Kriegsmarine surface fleet. As we all know, the Bismarck was the pride and joy of it. In June of 1941, Germany launched its invasion against the Soviets. This meant that resources were being poured into the Wehrmacht's land and air forces on the Eastern Front, and the Kriegsmarine once again was left a bit stranded. The Kriegsmarine's era of happily and successfully butt-boinking the British in the Atlantic was officially over. Now it was time to do it to the Americans. America formally entered the Second World War December of 1941 following the attacks on Pearl Harbor. This greatly excited Dönitz, who realized that his sinking opportunities off of the American East Coast were grand. Oh yeah, here's the second happy time. The US Navy was really stubborn and refused to adopt measures that would prevent U-boats from attacking convoys off of the East Coast. And so that's exactly what the U-boats did. And once again, the Kriegsmarine saw great success against Allied convoys. The second happy time lasted even less than the first. It only lasted about 6 months. While the Kriegsmarine was focusing on unleashing hell on the American East Coast, the Royal Navy was building itself up. A bunch of these Flower-class corvettes were built and were being implemented as anti-U-boat escorts for merchant convoys in the Atlantic. Also, a new weapon, the Hedgehog, was added to many Allied frigates and corvettes and could fire up to 24 spigot mortars at their U-boat targets. They were especially efficient because if they missed, it would not appear on Kriegsmarine sonar, but once it hit, it was really effective. In 1943, Hitler got really annoyed with Grand Admiral Erich Raeder after he had mistakenly told Hitler that the Battle of the Barents Sea was a Kriegsmarine victory. Spoiler alert, it was not, and it led to a bit of a naval shakeup. Raeder, despite his experience, wasn't exactly seeing eye to eye with Hitler about how the Kriegsmarine should proceed. Hitler didn't like Raeder's approach to surface fleet expansion and preferred the use of U-boats instead, as they were genuinely proving more effective. This led to a huge disagreement between the two, as Raeder wasn't too keen on Hitler's idea of scrapping his ongoing shipbuilding projects in favor of the production of more U-boats. Raeder resigned, more or less to keep his dignity intact, or maybe to avoid being blamed for everything going wrong. Karl Dönitz was then appointed in his place of Grand Admiral. Dönitz did manage to convince Hitler to keep the capital ships Erich Raeder was so adamant on keeping in order to deter the Royal Navy with the illusion that their surface fleet had something going on, which actually did quite well on that purpose. But things were not getting any better past this point. They were only getting worse. The Kriegsmarine surface fleet was completely cooked by this point, and because of Allied bombardments on German ports, the Kriegsmarine was suffering devastating losses, not even at sea. Plenty of Allied convoy developments were being made at this time as well. Convoys could now travel much faster than before. U-boat losses were ticking higher and higher by the months, and the Kriegsmarine was very quickly slipping right out of the hands of victory over the Atlantic. After the summer of 1943, Karl Dönitz was overwhelmed with his losses in the Atlantic. As a result, he was forced to order his U-boats to avoid Allied convoys. This was a big deal, as before this, the U-boats were pretty much a threat to severing the transatlantic trade routes and starving Britain. From 1943 to 1945, around 600 U-boats were lost to Allied forces.
In 1944, the Kriegsmarine surface fleet had lost its final grip on some semblance of importance in the war upon losing Bismarck's sister ship Tirpitz. Allied victory was getting more clear by the day, and the Battle of the Atlantic stretched out until 1945, when Germany was officially defeated. That was the end of the Kriegsmarine. Before I finish the video off, here's the part where I talk about their uniforms. I admit I am new to Kriegsmarine uniforms, so I can't display much from my own collection or go too far into detail as my knowledge on them does not yet span that far, but here is an original guide I've picked up from a flea market overseas, and here's the uniform I wore in the video, which is incomplete. I'm working on it fast though, and in an upcoming video I should have an U-boat kit complete for you guys alongside some lessons on what they wore and endured underwater. Anyways, here's my tailored Kriegsmarine mantle coat set. I have the shoulder boards of a Kapitanleutnant, the rank of many U-boat aces such as Gunther Prien and Otto Kretschmer. My caps are a corresponding rank. One of them has a white cover, which was worn at sea by U-boat commanders. Standard officer caps had this golden cookie cutter pattern at the rim, though field guide officers sported a single wreath on theirs, while admirals had a double wreath and NCOs had plain black visors. The Kriegsmarine also wore sailor caps, overseas hats, and Stahlhelms alongside a couple other hats. I should note that these coats would never have been worn inside of an U-boat, as it would greatly inconvenience anyone trying to move in the cramped spaces inside. This was a surface-exclusive coat. Here are some of the other uniforms displayed in my manual here. Me and a friend tried our very best to translate it, and it is on my Instagram page, but good luck deciphering it. The uniforms of the Kriegsmarine were largely loyal to universal maritime traditions, such as the consistency of navy blue fabric and gold embellishments, alongside the presence of cuff ranks. The sailor uniforms look, well, typically sailor. The average Kriegsmarine uniform was pretty much identical to the ones of its predecessors, the Kaiserliche Marine, but with modernized medals, shapes, and insignia.
Historians argue the overall performance of the Kriegsmarine heavily. Some say it was really damn shabby. Others say it performed great despite their unfortunate circumstances. What is fact, though, is that in comparison to the other branches of the Wehrmacht, it received much less funding and much less care. It is also true that the casualty rates were incredibly high amongst the Kriegsmarine members, most notably amongst the U-boat fleets, which had a whopping 75% casualty rate, higher than any other branch in the Wehrmacht. 40,000 men entered the U-boat Waffe, and 30,000 never went home. The U-boat fleets, despite their massive personnel losses, saw quite some success. A rough total of 14 million tons of Allied shipping were lost to the U-boats in the Second World War. That makes up more than half of the total tonnage of 26 million sunk in both of the world wars by Germany, and 68% of the total tonnage sunk by the entire Kriegsmarine. It is also largely agreed upon that Plan Z and Hitler's negligence definitely hindered what the Kriegsmarine could have been. But like I said, it is largely left to a matter of opinion. So what do you think? Do you think the Kriegsmarine could have won the Battle of the Atlantic? Let me know down below. Thanks so much for watching. If you're interested in joining World of Warships, be sure to check out the link below. And if you'd like to support my channel further, you can do so on Patreon. I really appreciate all of your support. See you in the next video.